I opened my apartment door, expecting a delivery, maybe a package I'd forgotten about. Instead, there she was. Chloe. Standing right there on my doorstep, looking like a ghost from a past life. Her makeup was smudged, hair in a messy bun, and in her hand, she clutched the same old suitcase she'd walked out with 2 years ago. I remember that suitcase. It felt like another character in our breakup story. She didn't even ask to come in. She just started talking, a torrent of words tumbling out, something about how Brandon had broken up with her, called her too demanding, too high maintenance. And then, the kicker, she'd realized she'd made a horrible mistake leaving me. I just stood there in the doorway, blocking the entrance, my brain trying to catch up with my eyes. Because the Chloe standing before me? She wasn't the same woman who'd coolly told me we were better as friends all those years ago. And more importantly, I wasn't the same man she'd left behind. It's funny how history repeats itself, isn't it? To understand this moment, you have to go back to how we even got there. Chloe and we dated for 3 years, lived together for the last year and a half in a decent 2-bedroom in San Diego. I was a digital marketing manager, making about $78,000 a year. Stable. Comfortable. Nothing crazy. Chloe worked part-time at a boutique downtown, maybe $26,000, always talking about courses to level up, but I never saw her finish any. I drove an old Mazda 6. I paid most of the bills. My evenings? They were spent building a side consulting business. I wanted more than just a steady paycheck. Chloe, she liked nice things. Expensive brunches, designer bags she'd save up for, weekend trips to Napa Valley. And for a long time, I didn't mind covering most of it. I thought we were building something together. The problems started slow. The kind of things you notice, but you tell yourself you're overreacting. She'd come home from networking events at 11 at night, smelling of cologne that definitely wasn't mine. When I'd ask how it went, she'd get defensive, call me paranoid. She started talking more and more about the successful men she'd meet, how they drove luxury cars, how they invested in themselves. My buddy, David, he warned me early on. Bro, he'd say, she's shopping around, and you're the safety net while she tests the market. I brushed it off. I loved her, or at least I thought I did, and I thought she loved me back. I was working 12, sometimes 14-hour days between my job and my side business, trying to build something real. And she'd complain I wasn't present enough, always working, even though the money I made was funding the lifestyle she wanted. Then came the night everything changed. I should have seen it coming. I got home around 8, after a client call, picked up Thai food, her favorite, and found her at the kitchen table. She had this weird, formal energy. Hands folded. Serious expression. I knew, before she even opened her mouth, this was planned. Alex, she started, we need to talk. I set the food down, sat across from her. She went into this whole speech about thinking, about wanting different things. She said I was safe, stable, but she needed someone who matched her ambition, someone who could provide the lifestyle she deserved without her worrying about money. Then, the line I'll never forget. She looked me right in the eye. I think we're better as friends. Like she was doing me some kind of favor. I sat there, processing. And it hit me. This wasn't about compatibility. She'd found someone with more money, and she was trying to make it sound noble. I could have argued, begged, promised to change. But instead, I just said, okay. If that's what you want. She blinked. Like I'd spoken a foreign language. Her face went from serious to confused, then almost angry. She expected a fight, a breakdown, some dramatic movie moment. Instead, I asked if she needed help packing, if she had somewhere to go. Calmly. Like we were discussing a work project. She said she'd stay with a friend, come back for her stuff. I told her I wouldn't be home. She could take whatever she needed without it being awkward. The confusion on her face deepened. Frustration, maybe disappointment. I don't know. She just grabbed her pre-packed suitcase from the bedroom and left without another word. I sat there in the quiet apartment, the Thai food getting cold. And instead of sadness, I felt this weird sense of relief. Like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had just lifted. That night, I opened a spreadsheet. Calculated exactly how much I'd been spending on her monthly. $1,400. That money would now stay in my pocket. Money I could invest back into my business. The next morning, I woke up, went to work. Nothing had really changed, except I didn't have to pretend anymore. David called, asked how I was. I told him I was fine. He seemed more confused by that than anything. He kept waiting for me to have a breakdown, show up drunk, angry. It never came. Instead, I threw myself into my work. My day job, my consulting business. Within 2 weeks, I landed my first major client. A $15,000 project. Impossible to focus on if Chloe had still been around demanding attention. Sitting at my desk after I closed that deal, looking at the contract, I thought, losing her might genuinely be the best financial decision of my life, even if I hadn't made it on purpose. She texted a few times, asking how I was, hoping we could still be friends. My responses were short, polite. I'm good. Hope you're well. That's all she got. And I could tell from her attempts to extend the conversations that this wasn't what she expected either. David would show me her Instagram sometimes. Pictures at fancy restaurants, new designer bags, Brendan's arm around her shoulder. Clearly showing off her upgraded life. I didn't follow her. Didn't check. Didn't care. I was too busy building something real, something that was mine, something nobody could take away by deciding I wasn't ambitious enough. Brandon Walsh. That was the guy's name. I only knew that because mutual friends couldn't help but fill me in. 32, investment banking, BMW M5, lived in some luxury high-rise downtown. Gossip said they'd met at one of those networking events Chloe used to come home late from. David's theory was she'd been lining him up for months. The math checked out. She didn't leave me and then find someone better, she found someone with more money, and then manufactured a reason to leave. Her lifestyle changed fast. Within a month, she went from part-time boutique work to basically being a full-time Instagram influencer. Her content, look at this expensive thing my boyfriend bought me. Splitting appetizers became omakase dinners that cost more than her old monthly paycheck. One designer bag became a weekly collection. My Mazda became private car services. David analyzed it like a financial consultant, she's not paying for any of this. She's just traded one ATM for a bigger one. He wasn't wrong. Meanwhile, my side business was actually taking off. That $15,000 client turned into 3 more referrals. Suddenly, I was pulling in $8,000 to $12,000 per project, on top of my salary. I was working insane hours, 14-hour days sometimes. But the difference? Nobody was complaining I wasn't present enough. Nobody was measuring my worth against other men's bank accounts. I had freedom. My apartment stayed clean. My fridge had actual food instead of expensive takeout. And that $1,400 a month I wasn't spending on someone else's lifestyle? Straight into investments. About 3 months after the breakup, Chloe started reaching out again. Subtle at first. Miss our conversations. Remember when? My responses stayed the same. Short. Polite. Devoid of emotional investment. Yeah, that was nice. Hope you're doing well. I wasn't being mean, just treating her exactly like what she said she wanted to be, a friend. Apparently, that wasn't sitting right. The messages got more frequent, more pointed. Then came the night she called me at 1 a.m, from a club, music blasting, her words slurred. She was out with Brendan, but she was bored, thinking about me. I was in bed, finally getting decent sleep. I just lay there listening to her ramble about how different everything was now, how she missed our simple times. When she finally paused, I told her she should probably go back to her date, hoped she had a good night. Then I hung up. David thought it was hilarious. He said she was realizing money doesn't buy personality. The real shift happened around month 6. I landed a contract that changed everything. A company wanted me to handle their entire digital marketing strategy, $80,000 upfront, plus bonuses. They wanted me on retainer for a year. I quit my day job 2 weeks later, moved to a better apartment in a nicer part of San Diego. Overnight, my income basically tripled. I wasn't the guy grinding in the shadows anymore. I was the guy other people in my industry were talking about. For the first time since the breakup, I felt like I was building the life I wanted, not just surviving. That's when Chloe started showing up. Too frequent to be coincidence. A coffee shop I'd never been to, she'd walk in 10 minutes later, acting surprised. A networking event, she'd appear with Brendan, making sure to stop and chat. She'd compliment my new watch, my clothes, ask about work in a way that screamed she was fishing for income info. Brendan would stand there, bored, checking his phone. I'd keep everything surface level, polite, then excuse myself to talk to literally anyone else. David started calling her a financial stalker. And honestly, it wasn't far off. The most obvious incident? She somehow found out which gym I joined, and suddenly, she had a membership there too. Showing up during my usual workout times. I'd see her on the treadmill, facing the weight section where I was. Or she'd coincidentally need the machine right next to mine, always starting conversations about how crazy it was we both ended up at the same place. After the 3rd time in 1 week, I switched gyms entirely. Didn't tell anyone. Paid extra for a membership across town, just to avoid the awkwardness. What really struck me was how transparent her motivations were becoming. She didn't miss me. She missed the version of me I was becoming, the one with money and success, who could give her the validation she craved without relying entirely on Brendan. I was supposed to stay the struggling guy, the safe backup option. But I'd upgraded myself. And that wasn't part of her plan. She wanted me stuck where she'd left me, so she could feel better about her choices. The fact that I wasn't stuck, that I was thriving without her, seemed to bother her more than anything. So, when Chloe showed up at my apartment with that suitcase, it wasn't a shock. I had just finished a call with investors who wanted to put money into expanding my agency. We were talking about an $800,000 deal. As she stood there, crying about Brendan, about her horrible mistake, I didn't move aside. I just listened. She launched into a rehearsed speech about second chances, about how money doesn't buy happiness. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known because I'd kept my business growth relatively quiet on social media, was that I wasn't the same person she'd left. I wasn't the guy making $78,000, grinding on side projects. I was running an agency projected to hit $3 million in revenue this year. I'd just put a down payment on a house. And I was seeing someone new, a woman named Olivia, who ran her own successful consulting firm and didn't need me to fund her lifestyle. Chloe was still operating on old information, still thinking I was probably single and struggling, and would be grateful she came back. I could see it in her eyes, in the way she talked, like she was doing me a favor by giving me another shot. I was about to tell her this wasn't a good time when my phone rang. It was David. I answered, right there in the doorway, while she stood waiting. David was calling about meeting up later to celebrate the investor deal. And he was loud enough that I knew Chloe could hear him talking about the $800,000, asking if I'd picked up the Mercedes yet, or if I was still driving the Mazda. I watched her face change in real time. Watched the recognition hit her that something fundamental had shifted since she'd last checked in on my life. When I hung up, she asked directly if what David said was true. If my business was really worth that much now. I told her honestly that it was doing well, better than I'd expected. The energy in the conversation changed immediately. Like a switch flipped. Suddenly, she wasn't the apologetic ex-girlfriend seeking forgiveness. She was practically vibrating with this manic energy, talking about how she'd always believed in me, how she knew I'd be successful, how we could be so good together now that we were both in better places. She started touching my arm, leaning in closer, saying things about how Brendan never understood her the way I did, and how money didn't matter to her anymore because she'd learned what was truly important. I just stood there, watching this performance. This complete transformation from sad and desperate to calculated and opportunistic. And I realized she hadn't learned anything at all. She hadn't learned that money doesn't matter. She just learned that I had more of it now. And that made me valuable again, in her eyes. I told her straight up that I appreciated her coming by, but I wasn't interested in revisiting what we had. That I'd moved on. And I was happy with where my life was now. She tried to argue, said I was being unfair, that everyone deserves a second chance, that she'd changed and grown. I pointed out that she'd shown up with a suitcase the same day Brendan dumped her. If she'd really changed, she would have reached out months ago when I was still in my old apartment, not right after finding out about my success. She got defensive, her voice rising, saying I was twisting things, that she genuinely cared, and this had nothing to do with money. So, I asked her directly, if I'd still been making $78,000 and driving the Mazda, would you be standing here right now with that suitcase? And she couldn't answer. Just stood there, opening and closing her mouth, like she was trying to find words that wouldn't prove my point. That's when she started crying again. But this time, it felt different. More angry than sad. Her voice rose enough that I noticed my neighbor across the hall peek out their door. She accused me of being cruel, of holding grudges, of never really loving her if I could just shut her out like this. I stayed calm. Told her I wasn't shutting her out. I was just treating her exactly like what she'd asked to be 2 years ago, a friend. And friends don't move in together. Friends don't get back together after messy breakups. She actually laughed at that, a bitter sound, and said I was being petty, that I'd regret this when I realized how rare real connection was. I told her I'd found real connection. With someone who didn't need me to prove my worth with a bank statement. That seemed to be the final straw. She grabbed her suitcase and told me I'd changed, and not in a good way. David showed up about 10 minutes after she left. I told him the whole story while we sat in my living room. He immediately pulled out his phone. He'd recorded part of the argument from the hallway, he said, because he arrived right when she started yelling, and he wanted evidence. We watched it back. It was surreal, seeing myself stay composed while she spiraled. David kept pausing it, pointing out moments where you could see her calculating, adjusting her approach, trying different angles to get the response she wanted. He said I'd handled it perfectly. That some people only value you when they think you're valuable to others. And that Chloe had shown exactly who she was twice now. Once when she left. And once when she tried to come back. 6 months later, my business hit $3.2 million in revenue. I'd moved into my house, picked up a Mercedes E-Class. Olivia and I were planning a trip to Europe together. I heard through mutual friends that Chloe had moved back in with her parents, after burning through what little money she had. She was working at a call center, posting vague things on social media about finding herself and learning hard lessons. I didn't feel bad for her. And I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt grateful. Grateful that she'd left when she did. Grateful that I'd never begged her to stay. Grateful that sometimes the trash really does take itself out and gives you the space to build something better than you ever could have with dead weight holding you back. What do you think about this story? Would you have reacted the same way?